Hello, welcome to the top 20 cards from this new set. Thunder's Junction. So we're going to be getting into it with 3 honorable mentions, and then we're going to get into the top 20. This is a long list and a bunch of reasonable competitive cards. Unlike MKM, the set is actually a little bit more pushed, but it still seems to lack a lot of the flavor that I would want, honestly. But I'm not like overly excited about any of these cards, and none of these cards I think would ever become a pet card of mine. But I think this deck, like I said, this set is pretty powerful overall. If you like my content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification to be alerted for future videos. We're on our way to 1,000 subs. Let's get there together. We're like 130 away, so let's get there. And let's get into the honorable mentions. Now, if any of these cards interest you at all, let me know down in the comment section, or if you can think of a way to utilize them that is not mainstream, also put a comment down there. Actually, any comment is appreciated. Let's get into the list. So, out of the gate, we have Free Stride Lookout. 2 and a green, 3/3 Reacher. Whenever you commit a crime, you look at the top 5, you may put a land into the battlefield tapped. Put the rest in the bottom of the library in random order. The reason why this is not my top 20 list, even though I love ramp, is most ramp decks don't commit crimes. So what deck is picking this card up? It's pretty strong, right? But what ramp deck is committing crimes? So that is the reason why it's not in my top 20 and why it's a honorable mention and a speculative pick. The commit crime does not really work with the premise of ramping, because most of the time you're sitting there with your rampant growth, your whatever, and you're just kind of playing your own little thing. And once you get to the fat top end of your curve, like, are you really wanting to play this? Like, to utilize it? So that means basically your top end has to be nothing but fight creatures. So like Kolga, it comes down, you fight, you get to maybe ramp. That could be where this card could be utilized, but as of right now, that strategy does not exist. Next, Malcolm, the Eyes. Blue and a red, flying, haste, 2/2. Whenever you cast your second spell, investigate. Pirates aren't a thing, sirens aren't a thing, so the creature types are irrelevant. A 2/2 flying haster has been printed multiple times already. None of them see any constructive play. The question is, can you consistently sprock and cash in your clues to make this card worth it? I'm not sure that you can, so that's why it's an honorable mention. I think its card is good if you could actually do that, but it's going to take a lot of work. Gitrog, Ravenous Ride. 3 black and a green. Trample Haste, 6/5. Pretty good stats. 5 drops are pretty hard to actually pull off in Pioneer, so I'm kind of curious to see if this card could do it, which is why it's so low on my list. Like, it's kind of highly inefficient. So whenever it deals combat damage, you may sacrifice a creature that saddled it. Saddling is basically crewing. You may tap basically any kind of number of creatures with power 1 or greater. So you may sack that if it deals damage to a player. You get to draw X cards and put X lands from your hand on the battlefield, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So I'm not sure what this card is going to actually do. I do typically play Abzan mid-range, but I don't think this is really a mid-range piece. Especially since 5 mana is kind of extreme for my personal taste. Like, I want to have efficient answers and efficient creatures that do a lot when they come down. This being a 5-drop is quite difficult. So that is my honorable mentions. Let's get into the top 20. Before we get into the top 20, we have 3 trap cards. Lotus Ring. This card is being speculated on because the Fervent Champion and that Boros dude does go infinite. It's basically a 4-3 card combo, plus you got to have some sort of payoff for your infinite mana already kind of in your hand or on the battlefield. It sounds like too much. Am I going to be trying it for Jank Tank? Possibly. If you want me to play for Jank Tank, let me know down in the comment section. Next trap card, the Key to the Vault, 1 in a blue. Equips for 2 in a blue. If this creature does combat damage, you may look at the top, that many cards from top of your library. So if you deal 7 damage of combat damage, look top 7, you may cast a non-land card for free among them. It's kind of just bad, right? I mean, this is more of a commander card. You might want to be like, oh my god, I could play this in my deck and castings for free. It's probably not worth the 5 mana investment that you just did for this. Lastly, for my trap card, this is going to get some heat. I know you control players are going to yell at me, but 3 steps ahead. 1 blue. For spree, you could pay an additional 1 and a blue to counter target spell. So basically a rare cancel. Basically it's going to be a $5 cancel. So that's going to be pretty sweet. Also, you can pay a blue and 3 additional on top of the blue. You may create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control. Yeah, this works with Gear Hulk. But not really, because if you play Gear Hulk, you only get the 3 steps ahead blue cost for free. You got to pay the 3 into it after. So you can't even really go good, like, really good with Gear Hulk. I'd rather just play Sublight Epiphany, which is a better card than this. The other mode, 2. Draw 2, then discard 1. So pay 3, essentially, for draw 2, discard 1. Oh boy. So most of the time, like, you're talking about like the first 3 or 4 turns, for a while, Sinister Sabotage is just a better card than this. If you do pay 5 mana into it, it can be better than Sinister Sabotage. But maybe, right? Because you also might want to actually just counter a spell for 3 and leave up a 2-drop removal spell. You can't really do that if you're investing into both modes on this. Now, where this card does become better than Sinister Sabotage, of course, is when your opponent casts a spell that can't be countered, or, has Cavern of Souls, so none of their spells can be countered, and then you could loot this card away. You can't do that with Sinister Sabotage. But overall, like, pound for pound, like, I would much rather just pay 3 and, surveil 1 than pay 3 and just get a cancel most of the time. Right? Most of the time, this is going to be just a strict cancel. There's going to be strict, very situational components where this is going to be better than that. And even then, you're tapping out for counter spell, draw 2, discard 1. You're rarely ever probably going to do the 3 one. I think this card is good, but I don't think it's as good as what people are leading it on to be. Yes, it's the best cancel, right? But I'm not considering Sinister Sabotage as a cancel, right? Because it's not. It has extra text on it for the cancel price. So, like, generically, so that would be like the discount cancels and whatever, right? This is probably a decent cancel. But like I said, it's going to be a very expensive cancel. It's going to be like $5. If probably maybe even more than that. Because people will try to play this. And I get it has flexibility. I'm not saying it's a bad card inherently. But for me, if I'm sleeving up a deck, I think I would rather pick 2 copies of Sinister Sabotage on my control deck than this. But 80% of the time, Sinister Sabotage is going to be the better choice. There's going to be niche situations where this card is better. I don't think it's as strong and as top tier as people are leading it on. So I know I'm going to get some down votes. Sorry. Let's get into my top 20. Number 20 is Tiny Bones the Pickpocket. A black 1/1 Death Touch. Whenever it deals damage to a player, you may cast a non-land permanent spell from that player's graveyard. You may pay any mana of any type to cast that spell. It's a skeleton, has Death Touch, 1/1. So it's probably going to be getting in there unless your opponent has First Strike, right? Or Double Strike. Secondly, it's a rogue. I don't know if Dimir rogues would want this at all. And if they do, maybe. This is a very questionable number 20. I kind of ran out of cards after I got to 19. So keep in mind this is definitely like a a numbered honorable mention. Let's get into number 19 on my list. Golden Vein Hydra. X in green, XX, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. ETBs with X ++1 counters. When it dies, create a number of tap treasures equal to its power. So, what is wrong with this card? For one, it has a dice trigger. Wizards, just give us leaves triggers instead, please. Just because of the fact that, I mean, everything you do anymore seems like it exiles stuff. It rarely destroys creatures anymore. Let's just get a leaves as the replacement effect for these dies on cards that you're trying to actively push, like this card, right? If this was leaves, I'd be more into it, right? Because it temporarily lockdown me. I guess I get a bunch of treasures. If they Sunfall this, I get a bunch of treasures, but I can't do that. And that's like one of the primary sweepers in Standard right now is Sunfall. Now, why I think this is actually might be reasonable for Pioneer, you're wondering, that is Soul Flare. This has 3 relatively important types or keywords on it: Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. So, and it's a castable card. And that's the other advantage of this card over to something like Zaltalpa, many of the other 8/7 drops, the Hex, the Bailoff that has Hexproof, whatever. Those cards aren't castable, right? This card is. And you might be actually you won't be really embarrassed casting this card overall. So that's kind of where I see this card. Outside of that, I'm not sure if this card actually is up to snuff exactly. I think some of the sleeper cards on my last video has some potentially more consistent, more playable cards, at least when it comes to tier 1, tier 2 decks than this one. But I do think this card does have a lot of upside with Soul Flare. So I'm not sure if it actually that makes it's going to be making the cut, but let's get into the next. Number 18 on my list is Dualist of the Mind. 1 in a blue, X, 3. Flying Vigilance, and basically its power is equal to the number of cards you draw on this turn. So by default, it's always going to be a 2 mana 1/3, unless you commit crimes, which so you could draw a card, loot, or you can draw extra cards with opt, consider, stuff like that, right? Treasure Cruise. Is this card great? It's probably worse than Ledger Shredder. But I am going to be featuring it in a deck this coming season with Profit. So I do actively am curious to see how this card functions in the deck and if it's actually worth the slots. It does have Vigilance, which is kind of nice for Emperor, but Emperor is not as like important in Pioneer as it is in Standard. Blue Light Control does play it, but besides that, for the most part, I think that's the main deck that plays Emperor. So let's get into number 17 on my list. Number 17, Magda, the Horde Master. 1 in a red. Whenever you commit a crime, put a tap treasure token. You may sack 3 treasures, create a 4/4 Scorpion Dragon with flying and haste. You can only do it as a sorcery. I am going to be trying this in my classic shell this season. I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing it for the Patreon members and the local members only, or if I'm going to do it for the YouTube. But if you want to see me play it, let me know in the comment section. But typically it's with the other Magda. Like you could sack it, get Gross, put it down, and attack with a bunch of 5/3s. This is a nice backup plan. It's still a dwarf. I think a couple copies of this is unreasonable for the deck. And we can commit crimes by just strictly fatal pushing, removing our opponent's creatures. So I do think it's pretty relatively an easy auto-clued to make some extra additional treasures in a given turn. Let's get to number 16 on my list. Rakdos the Muscle. 2 black, red. 6/5. Flample. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to the mana value from the top of your library until the end of the turn. You may play them until the end of your next turn. And mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. You may sacrifice another creature. Rakdos gets indestructible and tap it. Only activate once per turn, which is kind of rough. If they try to remove it, you respawn, make it indestructible, and they can do it again and kill it on the stack. But where this card will see play, I think it's one deck, right? For the longest time, there was Jund sacrifice decks with Corvold. If there ever happens to be a Rakdos variant that is looking to, have a 5-drop that's a 6/5 body, a couple copies of this is actually a pretty reasonable card for that. Other than that, it's probably the only place I'm seeing this card. Keep in mind, a lot of these cards I have selected here and here going forward, I kind of have like a target deck in mind that I think could optimize and use it. This one I think is strictly Rakdos Sacrifice. If they want to get a chunky 6/5 for 5 mana, that also could, block the Vampire, Vein Ripper. This seems like a decent include. Let's get into the next card. Number 15 is Grand Abolisher, white, 2/2. Your opponent can't cast spells or activate abilities on your turn from artifact, creatures, or enchantments. They can still technically play Jace, the one that can draw a card and loot on both players' turns, but this card is quite strong, actually, and it's a human, so it can go with Death to Taxes. Also, it's pretty common among combo decks in Pioneer, or in Modern in Cedra. This is new to Pioneer, which is why it's so high on up on my list. I think this card is still a good card overall. It's a cleric if you ever want to play party, but precisely this is a human, so that's pretty sweet. And like I said, it can stop your opponent from countering your spells in humans if you want additional copies of Cavernous Souls, I guess. That's the thing. Or like I said, if you want to resolve a combo. So this card could show up also in Amalia because they do actively want their stuff to resolve on the turn they try to combo. Let's get to number 14 on my list. Number 14, Harvester of Misery. 3 black menace. When it ETBs, all other creatures get -2/-2. You could discard this, and target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. You're like, well, why is this card on your list? For one deck in particular, the Enigmatic Incarnation, the deck typically has a decent amount of matchup dependent 5-drops in the deck. If you wanted a 5-drop come down that can get rid of a bunch of small creatures, this is a nice pick. That's kind of the only reason why it's number 14 on my list. It's like I said, Enigmatic Incarnation is a relatively upper tier 2 deck. It does play like 3 or 4 5-drops because they do have a decent amount of 4-drop enchantments. They sacrifice like fires to get to the 5. And this is a nice bullet just to put it down, wipe your opponent's small creatures from Convoke, and then proceed forward. If there's any other thing that I missed with this card, let me know down in the comment section. Let's get into number 13 on my list. Number 13 is the better counterspell and actually has some sort of use case in the format. Phantom Interference, it's a blue. You may pay additional 1. It basically becomes a quench. You pay 4 to create a instant speed 2/2 spirit with flying. Now, you're like, why is this card on your list but not the other trap card? Because this card actually has very particular use cases that the other card does not have, right? So early in the game, it's a quench, right? If you really need to counter something that's really important to your opponent's game plan, you're going to do it. Other case scenario, you're playing Transmogrify or Creativity. You're basically just trying to create a 2/2 that you can Transmogrify away or Creativity away. So it's really a very decent card at the front face, but the secondary card aspect of this card contributes to your overall game plan. Right now, they are playing Flip the Switch, which is a terrible card. This card, I think, replaces it, period. And it makes a 2/2. It doesn't have decay, so you can attack with it if you really need to. Overall, this card, I think, is pretty good for Transmogrify. If you're Izzet, any kind of blue base, Izzet or whatever, Grixis, whatever. Or Izzet Creativity. This card will probably just replace some number of your other cards, like Flip the Switch, stuff like that. Or even make disappear, where you don't really make a lot of tokens. So it's very rare that you could actually casualty it. So this should also probably replace it there as well in your deck. if you're running that. But that is number 13 on my list. Let's get into number 12. Torpor Orb. It's a reprint. We kind of know what this card does. ETBs, prevents all ETB from creatures from happening. It's a solid sideboard card. Thankfully, Karn is banned, so this doesn't just go into a Karn sideboard. But it does end up being a quite powerful card in very situational metas. So keep in mind, this is in Pioneer now. You wouldn't be upset to play a couple copies if it's relevant. I don't know if this actually stops Amalia. It would. It would, because then you would stop the life gain part, right? Because you really, in the Explorer. So they try to play an Explorer card, ETB Explorer. That doesn't work. If they try to, use the Soul Warden effects, this should stop the Soul Warden. In a way, this can help against Amalia. So let's get to number 11 on my list. Number 11 is KebbieG the Punisher. 1 in black. It's a 3/3. Whenever you commit a crime, it's not restricted more than once per turn. Exile up to 1 target black card from your graveyard, copy it. You can cast a copy if you do lose 2 life. So if you try to, let's say, you have 3 mana, you could duress. There's already a Go for the Throat in your graveyard. You could cast a Go for the Throat, basically turn it into a, what's that 2 mana? Short target creature, you lose 2 life. Basically, that's what you're creating out of that situation. So it's very unique in that regard. Like, there's multiple applications in a mono black deck, or even Rakdos if all your red spells are technically like Kolgan's command, right? Because it is black and red, so it just still works with this. So I do like this card in general. It's a good mid-range piece. If you're kind of going the more of the controlling mid-range package, not necessarily stuff like Gix, right? Gix is your other 3-drop options. Like, that's more for like aggro beats where you can actually draw into interaction pieces if you needed to. But this is something different than that, which I think is kind of sweet overall. If you have any applications you think that you might want to try this in, let me know in the comments. I think I have a list or two brewed with this card in it. I think this card is actually pretty good. And I don't even know if people are actually that high on it, but I think it's relatively good. Let's get into the top 10. Number 10 on my list, Oko, the Ringleader. 2 and a blue and a green. At the beginning of your combat, you may have Oko turn into target creature. It becomes that creature, and it has hexproof and adjacent to it. You can uptick it, draw 2 cards. If you committed a crime, you discard 1. Otherwise, you discard 2. -1, create a elk. -5, each other creature, non-land permanent you control, create a copy that's a copy of that permanent. It's a mass copy effect, which is kind of sweet. I think I'm gonna be trying it out in a Teamer Aggro as a couple copies. I also kind of want to try it out with Doppelgang / Ancient of Treachery. Just being able to make additional copy of it, take an extra permanent from our opponent, sounds pretty awesome. So I'm actually kind of excited. This Oko is not like busted. It's not overly strong. I think it's the perfect power level. I'm not sure if it could have been a 3-drop. Probably not. You're probably like, no, Kebbie, don't push him to a 3-drop. But maybe he could have been if it was like a green blue or green blue. That would have been a lot restricted, and it could have probably been reasonable with a power level. But this one is relatively decent. It's not going to break anything, I don't think. But it's not a bad card for grindy decks, for grindy matchups with aggro decks. I think this is a good top-end filler for that purpose. But let's get into number 9. I actually want to say one more thing. Don't put this on a ramp deck. You can't protect it. You know you can't protect it. Don't do it. Let's get number 9. Layla, Undefeated Slickshot. 1 blue and red. Prowess, 3/3. Whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery from your hand, exile that spell instead of putting your graveyard in it as it resolves. If you do, it's plotted. This card, I think, is actually pretty good. In one deck, I'm going to be trying out as a couple copies, and that is Nive. Niv Mizzet. It is 2 colors, so it works with Niv. You can dig and find this. And it turns basically all your lightning helixes, whatever, into basically another quote unquote round. So I think this is pretty awesome for that deck. Outside of that, I don't know if it has any other applications than that. It's not a wizard, which kind of stinks. It's a rogue, but so it can't work with Izzet wizards. Other than that, I think this card is pretty reasonable for Niv. I'm excited about trying it out in Niv. I haven't played Niv in a little bit on the channel. I'm going to be happy to try it out again. If there's any other applications, let me know down in the comment section. Let's get into number 8 on my list. Number 8, Colossal Rattleworm. 2 green, 6/5, Trampler. It has flash if you control a desert. And if it's in your graveyard, you may pay a 1 and a green, X out from your graveyard, search your library for a desert, put it into play tapped. It's kind of a rampant growth from the graveyard, which is actually kind of strong. It's a 4 mana 6/5. It's a great static creature, and it works well with counter spells or instant speed interaction. If you're planning on doing that in green, it's a little awkward in that case scenario that it is green, but I'm assuming you're not going to play this in a mono green shell. It's going to be probably some other color with it. So that is Colossal Rattleworm. I'm hoping this card has what it takes to surprise me to be a good card. So let's get to number 7. Aven Interruptor. 1 white. Flying flash ETB's exile target spell. It becomes plotted, so they can't cast it until next turn for free. But they kind of still have to pay 2 more. So any cards that your opponent casts from graveyards or exile, they cost 2 more to cast. So it is a taxing effect. I do have a green-white taxes deck brewed with this and the card from earlier. So I do think this card is relatively decent, especially since you're just trying to delay a Wrath. And this does still get Supreme Verdict because you're not actually countering it, which is actually kind of powerful. Let's get number 6 on my list. Fulmary Vault. Also keynote, I also have a Simulation Angus. 1 white, blue. I'm just going to go over it real quick. It's equipment artifact. When it ETBs the exile target creature until this leaves the battlefield, then whatever creature is equipped to this, it can become a copy of that creature. For 2. This is not really for Pioneer right now, so that's why it's kind of an honorary number 6. It's more for Modern, where there's Stoneforge Mystic. So Pioneer, there's not really a good Stoneforge Mystic replacement, so it's not really up to snuff, I don't think, for Pioneer, but look out for Modern. It's pretty good to have this as a 1 copy with your Stoneforge. Now, for the big card of the day for number 6, the Fulmary Vault. It's a land tapped for 1 colorless. You may pay 3, discard a card, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put 1 of those cards in your hand, put the rest into the bottom of your library in random order. What a powerful land. This is going to be probably one of the most expensive cards from the set, just because this is a very good commander card. There's a lot of artifact-based commanders, so this card is going to be insane in price. It's probably going to be about $80. I wouldn't be surprised. For Pioneer, like, there's reasonable artifact decks, right? Like, there's blue-white control that makes a lot of artifacts. Smithy, we talked about some in the last Sleepers video, where there's, some artifacts that makes card constructs. So, and this helps you find whatever card you may want. And you don't even have to reveal it, so it's kind of sweet. So I think this card is a great card selection. It kind of reminds me of Vivian's Arcbow. So, like, you pay X, discard a card, look top X. Yeah, so it kind of has a similar effect. This is a land, so it's not even a cost to you, right? Like, it's not taking up a slot from an actual good spell, right? This is just in your mana. You don't even sacrifice the card, so you're not, like, sacrificing the vault. So, like, where's the downside on this card? I don't know. Let's get number 5. Number 5 is a mixture of removal spells. Scorching Shot, red, deals 5 damage to target creature. Basically replaces Roast. If you're playing Roast, probably display this instead. This can't hit flyers. I do get it as double red, which could be a more painful experience, but it's just a better card for your sideboard. Requisition Raid, a white. You have 3 options for your spree, so you can choose one or more. Short turn artifact, creature, or I mean artifact enchantment, or you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, basically. So Convoke, aggro decks, this is a pretty good way for you to destroy artifacts and enchantments for 2 mana. 3 mana, you can do both, or 4 mana, you can do all 3 modes, so that's pretty strong for a aggro deck in white. So, and like, it's not even a dead card, technically, if you have it in your hand. It's not an artifact and enchantment to be destroyed. You could always just pump your team. So, that is relatively a good effect. I don't think this is main boardable, but you probably would bring it in from your side. Let's get to number 4 on my list. Number 4, Final Showdown. Single white, spree. All creatures lose all abilities until end of the turn. If you pay 1, you choose a creature you control. It gains indestructible on the turn. Or you could pay 3 and white, destroy all creatures. So for 6 mana, 3 white, you destroy all creatures at instant speed. Far as I know, there's one deck in Pioneer that this card will show up in as of right now. Does blue-white control play a copy of this? Maybe. But I think this is more for blue-white Lotus Field. So they actively can cast things at your opponent's turn, because you're either going to cast this or just end the turn. So, and having 2 Lotus Fields isn't all that hard. So being able to pay 6 mana for this relatively early in the game is not that difficult for the deck overall. So I think this is a reasonable card for that deck. So like I said, this already has a guaranteed application this card is going to be showing up in. Besides that, like I said, blue-white control could play a copy of it, maybe. But I think Supreme Verdict is better than this, at least in traditional control. Even Sunfall, because it's very difficult for you to get to 6 mana. By that point, you could already died to aggro. So Lockdown and Supreme Verdicts are just better for that deck. But Lotus Field, this is a really good card for him. So. And of course, it's a commander card. We got that too. Let's get number 3 on my list. Number 3 on my list, Pest Control. White, black. Destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 3 or 1 or less. So you could cycle if it's not relevant. Why? Why does it got to be cycle 2? Like, so I get it. If it's not good in a matchup, you could cycle it, but why? It's just not necessary. I'm probably going to try a copy of this in my Aven mid-range deck for the sideboard. It looks pretty decent, but there's not a lot of Boros Convoke decks running around right now. So a lot of the decks typically have higher mana value. So I think this card is very good. It's going to be a very expensive card for Pioneer. It's also going to show up in a lot of sideboards from here to whenever this card ever gets banned, which it shouldn't. But I think this card is really good. So we have 2 more cards to talk about. And you probably know what cards they are. Let's get number 2. Number 2 on my list is Jace Reawakened. Blue. Can't cast this during your first, second, or third turn of the game. Has 3 loyalty, +1 loot, +1. Basically plot a mana value for 3 or less from your hand for free. Then you -6. You get to, until your end of your turn, you may cast, whenever you cast a spell, you may copy it, choose new copies for the copy. So that's actually pretty strong. Like this card, of course, if you do have Leyline of Anticipation, you can make this have flash, so you could cast it turn 2 on your opponent's turn. But they can answer it before you get to actually use the abilities in that case, which could be a problem. But overall, this card is quite strong for the 2-drop Planeswalker for Standard and Pioneer, which is the first of its kind. At least when it comes to since Pioneer, right? Because Tibalt was before. If Tibalt was Pioneer legal, I would be happy, but no, it's not. So, not to mention, this also works quite well with Tibalt, right? Because the backside, so you could plot it, because the front side is 3 mana value, 3 or less. And then you could cast the backside for free. So, there is that type of effect, even with the 3-drop, you could play the, deadly, whatever the thing is. It destroys all creatures but one. So there's many things like that to where you could cheat like that BTL does in this Pioneer format. This could do a similar thing if the front side is 3-mana value or less. So, you already probably know what number 1 is, based on the elimination of Jace being number 1. But the number 1 card, I think, is definitely the best card that's been printed in the last 2 sets. So let's get into it. Number 1, Slick Shot Show Off. 1 in a red. Flying Haste 1/2. You could plot it for 1 in a red. So you cast it on a later turn. This is really, I think, important in this kind of strategy. If you're just trying to spend your mana, right? And you're facing a aggro deck or removal deck, and you don't really want to invest too much resources onto the board, but you want to invest your resources for future turns. So you could play this on a later turn and immediately bolt, shove, right? And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this gets a +2/0 until end of turn. So it kind of has a very sweet effect. Like I said, early in the game, it's just a hasty 1/2. Come on down on turn 2 or turn 3. And then you could also, bolt your opponent. So you could deal 3 and 3. So 6. So later, after you invest a couple bodies, 2-3 bodies on the board, then you're more inclined to want to plot this just so you can later on use this card once they wrath it, post-wrath. And it has haste, so it's really hard to actually, you used to get a shot in most of the time. Of course, we did just see the final showdown, so they can wrath it and not take any damage, regardless of the haste. I like this card. What card is your favorite card from the set? What do you guys disagree with me about? Are you mad at me for labeling the blue counterspell as trap? I want to know all this down in the comment section. Hopefully I didn't get just a bunch of unsubs for that take, but I do actively worry about that card. Like, I don't think it's going to be as good as people think it's going to be. Or as far as I know, it could surprise me and be a decent, really good card. So we'll find out. But until next time, hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day. So don't forget the Patreon stuff, locals, all that is in the description. And all the stuff about, you can pay $20. I will play your deck through a league. And I also will write an article about it with recommended upgrades to the deck that you could do, make it better and whatever. All that stuff is in the description, along with my Discord channel and my email if you want to reach out to me about that option, but the $20. So until next time, hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.